Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and as you can see, today I'm going to share with you my entire original Xbox game collection. Now I have a little over 290 games for the original Xbox. It's actually one of my favorite systems to collect for. And so today I'm going to share some of the highlights of that collection, including some of the more popular games, maybe some of the more obscure ones, some of the hidden gems, and even some of the more collectible and rare games. Let's take a look. Now, before we get started, I do want to let you know that I'm going to go pretty fast here because we have so many games to get through, and I really want to be able to talk about most of these, starting with some of the more collectible and expensive games on the original Xbox. Now, thankfully for collectors, the vast majority of original Xbox games are not expensive at all, but there are a few that are fairly collectible and hard to find and can be kind of expensive. Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast is my most valuable original Xbox game, and I am so glad I was able to get this years ago because it is such a great game. This is a fantastic arcade racing game. As you see here, it runs really well, it controls extremely well, it's just really fun. I go back and play this game all the time. However, it's important to note that it's not the only Outrun game on the original Xbox. There is Outrun 2. The wild thing is that while Outrun 2006 can be sometimes over $200, Outrun 2 often goes for only $20. The difference between the two is that Outrun 2 came out first, and it has the 15 stages from the arcade original. Outrun Coast to Coast came out a couple years later and includes an additional 15 stages, but oddly doesn't look as good. Outrun 2 looks a little bit better. It seems like Coast to Coast is maybe a lower resolution. It's weird, but you know, they're both Outrun and they play fairly similar. Yeah, just be aware if you're a collector of it that there are two different versions of this game and one is way more collectible than the other. This is an odd one because this is Teen Titans on obviously the original Xbox. However, it also came out on the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube and also the Game Boy Advance, but it's the Xbox version that is the really hard to find version of it, the one that goes for way more money. And this is a really fun game. Now, I'm not familiar with the original animated series, but I do like this game a lot. And I think it just didn't sell very well on the Xbox. That's probably the reason why it's kind of hard to find and also the reason why it's kind of expensive. Futurama is another game that is surprisingly expensive on the original Xbox. It's not the most expensive version. The most expensive version is on the PlayStation 2, but this version here will often go for over $200. What's cool about this game is that it's basically an entirely brand new episode of the series. So if you're a fan of Futurama, well, you have to own a copy of this, and unfortunately, it is gonna cost you. Typically, Conker's Live and Reloaded is not an expensive Xbox game. It usually goes for about $40 or $50. However, I happen to have a sealed copy of it. I've actually had an unopened copy for years, and then I have the sealed copy now. And so because it's sealed, it does go for a little bit over $100. Here's a really cool one called Metal Wolf Chaos. This was a game that took a long time for me to get back in the day because it's a Japanese exclusive original Xbox game. It's a crazy over-the-top mech game that I couldn't wait to get a copy of many years ago. However, what's cool about this is that Devolver Digital reprinted it. They basically did an HD remaster for the PlayStation 4 a couple years ago. So they actually brought this game back, and if you want to play it today, it's way easier and way cheaper to do so on the PlayStation 4. The Otage games are platforming beat-em-up games that are exclusive to the original Xbox, and they are super fun. They have really great graphics and they control extremely well, and while both of them are very sought after, especially for Xbox collectors, it's really the second one that commands the most price and is the most valuable. There's not a lot of arcade style shoot 'em ups on the original Xbox, but they did get an exclusive one called, I believe it's called Xynine. It's a really cool game, looks fantastic on the Xbox, a little bit hard to find, and again, can be kind of expensive if you want to collect it today. Phantom Dust was a game that I think kind of flew under the radar for years and years until most recently, I believe there was a Twitch streamer or somebody like that who started playing this game, and suddenly this game became extremely collectible and really sought after. I don't think it's extremely expensive to get today, but it's certainly more popular than it ever was when it first came out. Like I said, I think it flew under the radar. People who played it loved it. That's the cool thing about Phantom Dust, is that it actually is a really great game. It's exclusive to the Xbox, but in the last couple years, it's gotten more popular. Back when the Xbox first came out, it was really known, at least to a lot of my friends, as being the console if you wanted to play first-person shooters, and I have a bunch of them here. A lot of these will be well known, some of them not so much, but I wanted to talk about two of them right here. That is Dark Watch and Tron 2.0 Killer App. Now, neither of these games are perfect. However, it's interesting because when I insert footage, especially from Dark Watch, into my intro, people will always ask me, what is that game? Or if you play Dark Watch, you're like, yeah, I used to love that game. What's cool about Dark Watch is that you play as a vampire in this kind of Western steampunk world that he lives in. His name is Jericho Cross. Badass name, right? He's a gunslinger, vampire. And what I love about this game is that his morality is up to you. So many times in this game, you'll get to choose if you want to be good and save somebody's soul or be evil. And the first person shooting in this game is really solid. It's very arcadey, very fast paced, but man, I really like this game a lot. And then I want to point out Tron 2.0 Killer App. Again, this is not a perfect game by any means, but I'm a big fan of the original Tron. And at the time that this game was released, this was kind of the sequel to the original movie from the 1980s. Legacy hadn't come out yet. And so it's a cool take on that world, that Tron world, the aesthetic, and all of the gadgets and, you know, the things that they would say in that movie. It's neat. Again, not the best game, but I do dig it a lot. Also, I want to do a shout out to the Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay. You see the original game here as well as a bonus disc. When this game originally came out, I thought it was the best looking Xbox game ever. I was blown away by this game. I just really loved it. It was a total surprise because, you know, you didn't know if it was going to be good or not, but yeah, it was way better than I expected it to be. And so there's just a ton of first-person shooters on the original Xbox. I think that's the thing that's really fun about collecting for this system, is because it did this genre so well, the controller and the way it felt in your hands, and a lot of the third-party games that would come out, you know, at that time, both on the PlayStation 2 and the original GameCube. Often it was the Xbox version that looked and ran the best. And so I would play a lot of these games on the original Xbox, and even today, when some of these games might be delisted from Steam, it's often just easier to go back and replay them on the Xbox. Of course, if you're going to talk about first-person shooters on the original Xbox, of course you have to talk about Halo Combat Evolved. I mean, what can be said about this game that hasn't already been said? It was a system seller. It was everything. It basically is a huge part of why even the original Xbox was successful. Which does lead into something that I want to talk about when it comes to collecting for the Xbox. You might actually run into this if you find these out in the wild. Often you'll see these here where it says Microsoft Company Store Purchase Not for Sale, and then it has an employee number there. We see these all the time in the Seattle area because Microsoft is here, but you'll run into this all over the place where basically this employee bought this at the store and they slapped a sticker on, which is really hard to get off. I believe they did that because employees got such a deep discount that they were concerned that employees would buy them in bulk and then turn around and try to sell them online or trade them in or something. I also occasionally run into this right here where it says property of the Xbox Game Support Team. These also make it out into the wild, and I think they're pretty cool. I think they're kind of part of that history. As much as the original Xbox was known for Halo, in my mind, it was also known for the best place to play, at least on console, the Splinter Cell games. I loved this series when it came out. I loved all the Tom Clancy games, actually, and yeah, Splinter Cell, special place in my heart. I like stealth games anyways, but man, Pandora Tomorrow and Chaos Theory, those are masterpieces. Even today, I think they're amazing. This is the era where Rockstar really took off, and especially the Grand Theft Auto series, 3, Vice City, San Andreas, fantastic versions on the original Xbox. But people often forget that Rockstar also published Max Payne by Remedy, and man, I love the first Max Payne and also the second one. Fantastic bullet time third-person shooters with attitude, that film noir look that they would do with the comics that would tell the story. Just super fun games. Actually, I was replaying Max Payne 2 this week to capture this footage and just getting sucked back into that game again. Such a brilliant game. And because of that success of Grand Theft Auto, you started to see developers take notice and start making a little bit more hardcore adult games, I think. Instead of going after the Nintendo market with kind of, like lovey-dovey characters, you started to see stuff like this a little bit more. I remember the True Crime series because at the time they were advertising that they were trying to really accurately model the cities that they take place in. Now, these weren't really great games. They were a little bit too much like Grand Theft Auto. They didn't really have a ton of personality or staying power, but I do remember being kind of blown away by how accurate LA was in it, although it probably really wasn't. But for the time, it was pretty neat. I mentioned that I like stealth games, and I started to get into the Hitman series. However, the same developer of Hitman made Freedom Fighters. I loved this game when it came out. Basically, it's a third-person action game that does have some stealth elements in it, but really, it's more of a squad-based, almost like SOCOM a little bit, but just a little bit more arcadey. Again, there's in my mind, there's never been a game quite like Freedom Fighters. Very tough game, but also really fun. This generation produced some of the best James Bond games ever, and I loved playing them on the Xbox. Agent Under Fire, Nightfire, and Everything or Nothing are definitely in my top 5 James Bond games of all time. Nightfire is definitely a game I go back to and play time and time again because it's just a really fun, licensed James Bond game, first-person shooting. The level design's really fun. The collectibles are really cool. It just feels like a great James Bond game, and very similar to Everything or Nothing. This was really when EA was putting a ton of money and time and talent into making these be the best game that they possibly could be, and they pulled it off. I mean, these are still very replayable today. The Xbox got a lot of Star Wars games, and especially 2 of them here that are still very playable is Star Wars Republic Commando, and then you have a very curious one here that is exclusive to the Xbox. It didn't come out on anything else, and that is Obi-Wan. I'm not entirely sure why this never came out on the GameCube or the PlayStation 2. I assume it probably was planned for it, but for whatever reason, it is stuck on the original Xbox. It's not considered to be an amazing Star Wars game. Maybe that's why it kind of died here, but if you are a Star Wars collector, especially an Xbox collector, you're probably going to want to pick this up, and it's not very expensive. I do have a handful of Japanese imports for the Xbox. It wasn't very popular over there, and there aren't very many. But when I went to Japan, I made it a point to kind of look and see if they had stuff, that I might want to play or collect. And here are some of those. Here's a Japanese developed game for the original Xbox that was brought over to North America as Breakdown. This is exclusive to the Xbox and a really fascinating take on the first-person genre, again, by a Japanese developer. It feels very different than what you might get from a Western developer, if that makes sense. If you play this game, you get that vibe. It almost feels like a first-person fighting game or brawler. It does have shooting in it, but it feels more like a brawler. It's really weird. And also, too, it feels like a interactive adventure game or something. It's pretty wild. One of the most crazy releases for the original Xbox is Steel Battalion. This is a hardcore simulator of a mech. It's crazy because it comes with this massive, the biggest controller ever made for a console. It's nuts. Nowadays, most people play these at expos where you can network these together, and this is where the game really shines. It's a nutty game. It is absolutely bonkers. Only the hardest of hardcore collectors have it because it takes up so much room, but it is really awesome. This right here is one of the must-own original Xbox games, in my opinion, is Jet Set Radio Future. It is the sequel to the Dreamcast game, Jet Set Radio. And basically, it's a reimagining of that original game where it has a little bit larger levels, some new characters, a newer soundtrack, things like that. And I think Sega did this because they didn't want this series to die on the Dreamcast. I mean, the Dreamcast was a bit of a sales failure, unfortunately, but this is such a great game, and playing it on the Xbox is fantastic. Probably very similar to Shenmue 2. So again, Sega bringing that franchise over from the Dreamcast to the original Xbox, which made a lot of sense. And so these are just some other Xbox only games that originally came out on that system, including Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I wanted to mention because it is such a good game. You know, 99% of licensed TV video games are usually terrible, but this one is not. This one is for the Buffy fans, and I am one of those. And so this is a pleasure to play, and it's exclusive to the original Xbox. Another game I want to mention is Ninja Gaiden. I never know how to pronounce that, but Ninja Gaiden Black. The reason why this game stands out in my memory is because when I first got it, I let a friend of mine borrow it, and he came back the next day to work, and his eyes were bloodshot, his hair was ruffled, he looked like a mess, and he was like, "Dude, that's the hardest game I've ever beaten." He basically stayed up all night trying to beat this game. Very tough game, but also very awesome. Stubbs the Zombie was a game that for a long time was very sought after because it was exclusive to the original Xbox, and it's just one of those really fun games. You play as the zombie Stubbs in this game, and I believe it's like an alternate 1950s universe, almost like the Jetsons a little bit, but what's fun about it is that you get to play as the zombie, and you're basically just doing all this crazy zombie stuff, including dancing and nutty stuff like that. However, what's cool about this game is that recently it got a new remaster for the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X. And so now it's even easier to find and play if you want to, which I think is fantastic. This was kind of an odd time for Sonic, especially on the Xbox here, where you had games that either people thought were just okay, or in the case of Shadow, the people hated that game because of the shooting that you do in that. But it's Sonic Riders that is just, I guess, makes sense, but also is kind of odd too. Sonic Riders is basically just a racing game, which I guess makes sense in this universe because Sonic goes so fast anyways, and you're in these 3D environments. So, but I don't know. Again, I just think it's an okay game. I don't think it's great. I've mentioned it in other collection videos. I like this generation of gaming because there are so many of these collections, these classic game collections. It's really cool to have physical versions of all these Midway arcade classics. You see that there's like 3 volumes there in television, which is crazy. But then you also have Namco, Tecmo, Capcom. You've got a bunch of pinball tables, Sonic and Mega Man, and this is just like a small sampling. And I've mentioned in the past that I'm not the biggest fighting game fan. It's not that I don't like the games, I'm just not very good at them, and I don't put the time in to get good at them. But for some reason on the original Xbox, I have a bunch of them. At the time, I was getting back into Mortal Kombat for sure, but also too, I loved and still love the Soul Calibur series. I thought it was pretty cool how Soul Calibur 2 had a special character included for each console platform. The GameCube version got Link, the PlayStation 2 got Heihachi Mishima from Tekken, and the Xbox got Spawn. And I was a massive Spawn fan back in the 90s, loved the comic, I even liked the first movie, and so yeah, it's really cool to play as Spawn here. This is a great generation for survival horror games and thriller games. I'm a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft and the world that he creates. Loved those novels as a kid, and so I was very intrigued when Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth came out. This is a first-person game, and you know, back then we didn't get a lot of these type of H.P. Lovecraft-inspired games. Maybe we get a little bit more now, but back then this was very novel, and so it's not a perfect game by any means. It feels a little bit, I don't know, rushed or something, or not quite polished the way you would want, but I still think it's pretty cool. The same goes with The Thing. I love the original 1980s movie. It is a masterpiece. It is so good. And to get a Thing game was like, what? This is happening? And actually, it's not bad. It definitely captures the paranoia and the isolation of that movie. So it's pretty cool. If you haven't played The Thing, definitely check it out. It's pretty wild. Here's some other survival horror games that I really enjoyed at the time, and I still go back to them time and time again, including The Suffering. These games were really weird, really creepy, really fun. Hunter the Reckoning, there was 2 of these games that were released, and they play almost like twin stick shooters. Then you have the 2 Evil Dead games. I'm showing this one here, Evil Dead: A Fistful of Boomstick. Love that title. And they actually got Bruce Campbell to do the voice, which at the time was like very exciting because I love these movies so much. I'm a big fan of him anyways. And you know, again, this is not like an amazing game, but it's a type of game where you just get together with a buddy on a Friday or Saturday night, drink some beers, get stupid, and you know, kill some deadites. Do you remember this Rockstar franchise? This was very controversial at the time. And, you know, I was gonna say rightfully so, but looking back, I guess it's probably a little bit tame. I think the reason why this game is notorious is because how brutal and unflinching it attempts to be. It just wants to be as hardcore as possible. And I think because of the aesthetics and the art design, it mostly pulls that off, although it's obviously very dated today. And I also think that some of the more disturbing parts of this franchise really have been kind of rolled into parts of Grand Theft Auto and even Red Dead Redemption now. Some of the more torture scenes that characters might do, where this game is dedicated almost entirely to that, really they just kind of move that into the other more popular franchises. Does that make sense? There's a lot of mech games at this time, and some really good ones, and some also kind of more obscure ones for sure. However, the mech assault games on the original Xbox, I think, are really playable, really fun even today. Even though the graphics are a little bit dated, you can look past that because they're just fun. This is a franchise where me and my buddy Paul keep going back to it. Whenever the Xbox is connected, we want to play these games. It's the perfect kind of thing where you can just jump in and out of. You don't have to necessarily worry about the story. There is some, but it's really all about the fun gameplay. Being that the Xbox was so powerful for that generation, of course there was going to be a lot of racing games, and you see some of them here that I own. In my opinion, this is the height of the Need for Speed franchise, where they could do almost no wrong. I mean, the first Most Wanted was excellent. Underground and Underground 2 were amazing games. But then you had the Spy Hunter reboot. Remember when this came along? And again, I was like, really? They're gonna move Spy Hunter into 3D, but it made sense. Now, going back today, I was actually capturing the footage for the original Spy Hunter, and it's hard to play because the controls are really unintuitive for a gamer today. However, that said, if you give this game about 10 minutes or so to kind of learn the controls, there's so much going on that it's still really fun to play. And of course, I have to give a shout out to the amazing Burnout series that, again, got its start during this generation. The Xbox had excellent versions of all of these, possibly some of the best versions, again, because it was able to run the games a little bit higher resolution, maybe a little bit faster. And just like the Burnout series, obviously, I do want to do a shout out to SSX, even though I think of that series as being a PlayStation 2 franchise, which it started as. The Xbox got amazing versions of Tricky as well as 3 and On Tour. But a sports game that I don't talk about that much that I really liked a lot actually is Wakeboarding Unleashed. This is a surprisingly fun sports game on the Xbox, and what makes it fun is that it really takes elements of SSX and also Tony Hawk, but then applies it to wakeboarding. So it's kind of like skateboarding and snowboarding, but instead you're being pulled behind a boat. And so there's the whole water aspect of it, and also the wake of the boat that you can jump, and all these little things that are on the side that you can do tricks off of. Trust me on this, it's way better than you might think. The original Xbox wasn't really known for being a RPG machine, however it did have a decent amount of them. Some of them good, some of them not so great. However, there's no denying that Fable was so good on the original Xbox. It was for a long time the RPG to play on that system, and I really, really enjoyed it. And at the time, the only place to play Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, at least on console, and those games were very memorable. But I have to say that Jade Empire is the game, again, that I come back to, primarily because it's so good. It's an original IP, it's original story, original characters. They took a lot of the things that they learned from Knights of the Old Republic, the whole morality aspect of it, but they give it a little bit more depth. I really liked the real-time combat in the game. Also, the level design and the story was really cool. It's such a shame that as of today, there's never been a sequel to it because I think it's really good. There was also a handful of top-down RPGs, kind of like that Diablo style, These are really good. The X-Men Legends 1 and 2, I think, are really great games. The Dark Alliance 1 and 2, I don't like them quite as much as the X-Men games, but that's just a taste because when I think of Baldur's Gate, I typically do think of like a turn-based, deeper RPG experience. But I did want to mention a really weird one. It's not exclusive to the Xbox, it also came out on the PlayStation 2, but that is Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. This is when Interplay wanted to also try to make their game like Diablo or these other style top-down games. And this is a weird one because, I love Fallout, but this is not a great Fallout game. It's okay. I almost played it as a novelty or something. It's really, really weird. I don't think they knew what to do with the Fallout franchise, and this is probably an attempt to maybe bring it to the console market and see if it would do better there or something. I'm not sure. This is also the generation where you had a bunch of third-person platforming games, and you had a lot of different mascot characters. Everyone was looking for that next, almost like Ratchet and Clank or Jak and Daxter style game. And some of them are better than others. You see 5 of them here that I have on Xbox. I'd love to know which ones you played and which ones you like. Doing this video this week, going back and capturing the footage and taking pictures of the games and talking about them has really reminded me just why this generation was so good. It was so creative. Game developers, both big and small, were willing to take risks. They were willing to try new things and new ideas. And not all of it worked, and not all of these were big sellers or set the world on fire. But one of the joys of collecting is the ability to rediscover some of these games that you may have forgotten about, or discover new games that you never heard of. And what's great is that the Xbox in general is not very expensive to collect for. Again, 90% of the games on there are like $20 or less. And because the Xbox was so powerful, especially compared to the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube, often this is the best place to play them. But anyways, guys, that is my entire original Xbox game collection. I would love to know down in the comments if there is a game that you think I should get. There are a bunch more I don't yet have, and I'm always on the lookout. But as always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.